Well, hello class. Welcome to the first of several lectures on the nervous system. So we'll begin this with a recorded lecture, and then you'll hear me in person soon. So we're talking about the nervous system. We're really at the end of the semester. We'll talk about a couple chapters with the nervous system and then senses, which are really just input into the nervous system, right? And if you think about of all the systems, I mean, what would you be without your brain, without your nervous system? You'd have, imagine no input and no motor output. And what's going on behind the scenes, your heartbeat, your breathing, your blood vessels, digestion, all these things are controlled autonomically, kind of behind the scenes by your nervous system. So really, you wouldn't be much more than a machine, functioning machine without any thoughts, any personality, without this brain in there. So it's good stuff, and we'll begin at the beginning, and then we will build on that. All right, here we are, and there's chapter 10 and chapter 11. So first of all, it's like one of the final frontiers is the human mind, and how little we really know about it. And we cross into psychology and biology. There's no sharp demarcation there, really. And just you think about how we have this ability to the storage. It's a computer, and the storage capability in here. I mean, you have memories that are in color, and it includes smell and emotions and things you can't even put on a DVD, right? And how is this stored? Languages, they all the song lyrics, right? And anatomy and biology, right? But the song lyrics, yeah, I mentioned that. Yeah, so all these things, how they're stored, and how amazing that is, to have these memories and this ability to come up with poetry and original thoughts and things like this. And you wonder, how it's stored. And I think back to like computers. The data is stored in our DVD in ones and zeros, and say, how can you have this vivid, color, sound, video with just ones and zeros? But same thing. I mean, your DNA has 4 letters. All the different literature has 26 letters. So if you have enough storage space, you can have an amazing amount of vivid memories, like I mentioned. So storage space, how many gigs you got in your head, right? Well, we're talking about billions of neurons and all their helper cells. There's about 7.8 billion people on Earth, to put that in perspective. And you think you have all these neurons in your head. Yeah. And when we look at the connections, you're going to see it's all about connections, circuits that are diverging or converging, or even circular circuits, the way that we put our communication of our neurons together allows us to make decisions, right? You can make a decision, do I run? And it's going to be based on several lines of input, including previous experience and memory and all the data that is coming in there, and is going to be crunched. The numbers are crunched, and then you'll come up with a decision. So if you think about 100 billion neurons and all of them communicating with each other, all the circuits, it's just, the numbers are mind-boggling. Well, how do we know what different parts of our brain do? You ever wonder that? One way historically was with injuries. You get person was kicked in the head with a horse in a certain area, or they got a projectile in a certain area, and they could see what happened to the person, what are their deficits. Definitely. And then we also, nowadays, of course, we can take off the skull and have the brain exposed, and we can stimulate areas of the brain directly with electricity, and we can make people flinch and talk and smell something. So we have this ability to kind of map it in that way too. And then we got some great tools like this MRI. It's useful for joints and soft tissues in our body. And there's functional MRI too, which can give you real-time changes in your brain. Yeah. And if you're in an MRI, you have the ability to watch a video or read or listen, and it's, the future actually is going to be in lie detection. It's not going to be the old-fashioned measuring your respiration and heartbeat and things like that, but it's going to be looking at the brain. And as you answer, do areas of deception light up, or do you, or not? Do you appear to be truthful? So it's going to get right at it. We're already, getting there. And so, indeed, it's pretty amazing. I talked about how our scientific knowledge grows not just linearly, but in these stepwise fashion with new inventions or new paradigms. And then the invention of this functional MRI now just is going at light speed, how much we're learning, being able to use this really cool tool. And indeed, you can look and take, this is a brain with methamphetamine use, and you can see where areas are damaged, especially looking at reward centers. And yeah, I mean, just to step back one more step is that your brains, I mean, your prerogative is to leave more babies, is to leave more genes. And however you're going to do that, is going to be selected for, right? Your brain's going to be made for that. And also, why do we like chocolate and fatty foods? It's because and our ancestors, they gave off chemicals that make you feel good, rewards, when you have that sweet taste or that fatty taste. Or sex, same thing. You feel good because you're programmed that way, because those that feel that way leave more babies, and those genes get passed on. Those that don't enjoy sex or lots of calories, they left less babies because of both of those factors. So we really are just driven by reward centers, and our memory is going to our negative memories, negative associations are going to cause us to be fearful, and the opposite of our reward center. We do things that make us feel good. We want to keep doing them. So yeah, it's so cool. We're all brain chemistry, and it's really driving us. All right, and then again, this is first lecture, a big picture here. When we look at some of the great pushes in our lifetimes and scientific advancements, and JFK in the 60s, we're going to put a man on the moon, and gave a big speech in 62, I think, something like that. And why should we do this? Why would we spend all this money? What are we going to get from landing on the moon? And look at things like microwaves and toothpaste in a tube, things that we didn't expect come with these great scientific achievements. And we did. We landed it 1969. We landed on the moon. We did that. And then the human genome. This was back in your guys were, 1990s. Yeah, you guys were born mostly in the 90s. We need to figure out all the letters of the human genome. Yeah, it's 3.5 billion letters, a lot of them. And it actually came out ahead of schedule. We actually, since we decided to do this, our technology got better at auto-sequencing DNA, and several labs, both private and public labs, came together, and we got out ahead of schedule. And so we've mapped out the human genome. We've mapped out Neanderthal genes. We mapped out the rat genome, and all kinds of things we have. And and with that comes great benefits to humankind. We know a lot about genetic diseases, and so much came from that, from knowing all those letters. And then the human brain. So what I'm getting to next is if you think about, in the United States, the depression and mental illness, the toll it causes on our society, not just monetarily, but emotionally, and dementia, all these things. If we knew better how the brain works, we'd be able to solve some of these problems and get therapies and things that will yield great benefit, even though it's a huge undertaking, expensive undertaking. So Barack Obama, definitely, you can look this up, huge commitment, this brain activity map. And there's a lot of controversy too on how it's going to be done, and where the emphasis should be and how the data is shared. But this idea, we're mapping the depths of the ocean, we're mapping the universe. We should look inside at our brain and look at all these pathways and determine all these tracks and areas in our brain and what they do. And with that, it's going to come these side effects of dealing with migraines and depression and all kinds of mental illness. And so these basic science investments, and we're in a very political world now, and you'll hear people say, "Oh, why would we spend $10,000 to learn how this chipmunk mates? What a waste of money. It's people dying of cancer and things like that." But this basic research and investing in basic research, like we do at uni and everywhere in the world, yields things that we didn't expect. And so anything, in my perspective, putting into basic research, you never know what we're going to get out of it. Indeed. And if you look at the Human Genome Project, they cost $3.8 billion. My God, we can't afford that. Well, the investment came back with 800 billion benefits. And so when you look at where we're putting our money, and not being political here either, I'm just showing you that for more money than that, you get like 2,000 jets, that are going to wear out, right? So I'm just going to put a push for money going into basic research. Even though it doesn't seem to be have something useful in mind, we think as we begin this, whenever we put our minds to something scientific, we get benefits that are often unexpected. All right, so you guys can look more into this, but the idea of mapping the whole human mind is something we're putting our minds to. Yeah, looking within. All right, so let's get right at it. So our nervous system, we're going to do study reflexes. Is kind of cool. And we'll look at we could look at how fast the nerves are conducted down nerves, the speed, things like that. All kinds of great topics we'll get to. But just stepping back, the nervous system, appears in animals. Plants don't have one, but our simplest animals like a starfish and corals have a nerve net. No real brain, but they recognize touch and they can move towards it, or they have sensors for light and they can move towards or away. They're not thinking deep thoughts, right? They're not writing, any poetry or anything like that, but they do have the ability to react to their environment. And when you look at the nervous system, the star of the show is the neuron, right? You've all studied the neuron with its dendrites and axon, right? And cell body, right? So that is, in fact, really cool, big cells. And we'll talk a lot about how they can make electricity, bioelectricity, in order to signal and all kinds of cool things, obviously. But the unsung heroes are these neuroglial cells. Glial means glue. And these are like the helper cells, I'll say that. But they're not just there as filler, as cushioning for the neurons. They will deliver materials and take away waste, and they have a lot of functions beyond just being the glue that surrounds the neurons. And in terms of numbers, I like to think of your brain like a chocolate chip cookie, and the neurons are the chocolate chips, but the glial cells are like I number them 10 to 1. So you can imagine the cookie being the neural glial cells, the helper cells. In terms of divisions, the central nervous system will be our brain and our spinal cord. And then the periphery, coming off of that, the peripheral nervous system, we often call them CNS and PNS. The peripheral nervous system will be the spinal nerves that come off our spine. We remember the vertebrae, there are spinal nerves coming out between each vertebrae. And they're going to come out and make, the nerves of your arms and your legs and your body. And then off of the brain, there's going to be a dozen pairs of cranial nerves that basically go in the head region, just a couple going down your neck and beyond. All right, so these cell bodies of the neurons, when you think about your whole body, your corpse, your body, the cell bodies of the neurons, they're all in the brain and the spinal cord, except there's some clusters, some islands out in the rest of our body. We call those ganglia. Singular is ganglion. So ganglia are these clusters of nerve cell bodies outside the central nervous system, if you want a definition. But do realize the nerves that I feel, going down my carpal tunnel, my funny bone nerve that I hit, these nerves are just the wiring, just the axons, and the bodies reside in my spinal cord. So that's where the bodies of the neurons are in your brain and spinal cord, and the wiring continues out into my arms and my legs as the nerves. But there are these ganglia these swellings that contain cell bodies, out in our body too. All right, and then to further the division, we can look at kind of functionally. There's sensory and motor, and sensory is taking input into the central nervous system, and motor is sending signals out. Okay. Yeah, and the signals we'll talk about everything from me reading the screen to the feeling of coolness on this table, to the sound of my own voice in my ears, the beating of my heart in my chest. All these things are input into your brain. And another amazing thing, we'll see how much you ignore, right? How much you ignore. You go crazy if you possibly had to pay attention to all the sensory input. All right, so your mind, it's a beautiful filter that is just allowing the important things in. Yep. And motor going out, we talk about the somatic means your body. Soma is body. So somatic is going to your muscles and your glands too. And autonomic has to do with automatic. This is going to other glands and also to your gut and your heart and your lungs, blood vessels. So autonomic is the automatic. It's behind the scenes. And somatic is what you control. And I'm going to flex my biceps. Got it? All right, and so looking at a pathology, we can talk about migraines. And I don't have migraines, but my wife does, so I'm very familiar with this. But it's more than a headache. And if you look here, I put this on. I just put this on yesterday, looking at what kind of headaches you can have. And so you kind of feel a sinus headache or a cluster headache. TMJ, I put that on there because we talked about that temporomandibular joint pain you can get there. And what migraines are is that, well, there's a lot of mystery. We don't know. There are headaches that come on that often give you an aura where things become. You can look at YouTube and you can do a simulation of what a migraine would be if you've never had a migraine, and you can kind of see how things become fuzzy. And again, we don't know exactly what's going on. It used to be thought that there was blood flow changes in the brain, and now it's thought there's this wave of excitation and then relaxing, and that changes the blood flow. And so there are no surefire cures. We have many drugs that many of them are blood pressure and anxiety drugs, things like that we just kind of found have worked for some people. And the drugs can either be preventative, you take all the time, or they can be like triptans that you take at the onset of a migraine. If you take it right away, it may be helpful. Others you take like Topamax or something regularly, and then we hope that it prevents migraines. And some people have just a few migraines, and people have dozens per month, and they can last hours, even days, where it's debilitating, these headaches, and you can not be able to see out of one eye, et cetera. So indeed, one thing about them, about 3/4 of the sufferers are women. So it could be hormonal. It most certainly is. Hormones are involved with this. And there's often triggers that you can find. It's bright lights or foods like chocolates or like blue cheese, aged cheese, some of the preservatives and deli meats. Anyway, wine, red wine. So if you're a migraine sufferer, the first thing they want you to do is really to pay attention, write a journal of what's going on in your life and when these migraines occur. Because if you can find the triggers, your life is a lot better if you can avoid those triggers, right? Indeed. Yeah. So, as I said, I can go through a lot of other drugs, even Botox they're using, and propranolol, which is a beta blocker, things like that. Many drugs are useful, and if you're a migraine sufferer, they don't have one pill for people with migraines. They have several drugs in their toolbox that they can try and see if it helps, but debilitating migraines. I think I've talked enough about them. All right, so your nervous system, and I think brain, spinal cord, nerves in my body. Like, clearly, you take the senses from your environment. And it's so interesting too, because I know my brain, I know what I see, but I can't get in your head and what your experience with the world is, right? And how do I know what I see as red is what you see as red? We describe it and we similarly, but it's they're all shaped by your experience in your brain. And we speak a common language because we're taught that. But if you're born, so much cool stuff. And so sensory input is what's going to come in, not only from the external environment, from you can sense some things in your body as well. Your stomach is full, you don't feel good. All these things will be brought into the brain, sensory, and then motor is going to be when you do something about it. And you'll see afferent means in with an A, and then efferent, E means out, like making an effect. So it's another way to talk about sensory and motor. And then in between is this integrative function, indeed. And that's where we can put things together, where we can use the input, combine it with our past memories, and to make decisions, right? And so, that's what makes our brain so cool. And humans have a huge frontal area. We can make lots of decisions and not just do things by reflex. Cool. Yeah, just showing you, right? Sensory brings input. And again, a lot of it is autonomic beyond our thought process. So things that control our heart rate, our blood pressure, our breathing, our digestion, those things are done. There's input in your brain, but you're not conscious of it, right? But the things you're conscious of, like listening to this, you are listening and then you are translating these sound waves that hit your eardrum into syllables, into language, and what that language means. And indeed, and then you have the ability to put that into from short-term to long-term memory. And that's what you want to do. That's your goal here. And then, of course, the output is going to do something. You're going to do something. You're going to move. You're going to talk. You're going to do something. Yep. So see all integration taking place in the central nervous system, mostly your brain, but your spinal cord can make some decisions as well. And then the input and output will be the peripheral nervous system. These would be the nerves that are going to go into and out of your brain and spinal cord. Cool. Yeah, and this kind of is going to illustrate kind of what I'm talking about here. Looking at a reflex when you hit the knee and it makes you kick, right? Well, what you're going to have here is going to have stretch receptors in your quadriceps. And when they're rapidly pulled, there's going to be a sensory neuron that comes in. And if you notice this, I'm giving you a little preview, the cell body's in this ganglia out before it gets into the central nervous system. And then it's going to continue on into the central nervous system, your spinal cord. And in this case, this is a spinal reflex. The brain doesn't even have to be told about it. It's going to work even if you cut your head off, that you still would kick if someone hit your leg. Well, you would die shortly after. But if you cut that off immediately, hit someone in the knee, they will kick. All right. And then you can see here that it's going to synapse directly with a motor neuron here in red. That's going to cause you to kick. And so this happens in milliseconds, this reflex loop. And that also shows the green. You can have an interneuron here. So maybe there's some decision making. Maybe you're able to inhibit that if you know that someone's hitting you in the knee and it's not real, so maybe, and then maybe you could send the signal to the other leg. Yeah, they do. There's a lot of that. When you step on a piece of glass on one foot, that foot's going to retract. The other leg will immediately stabilize. So we're going to talk about that. So very cool. And then of course this happens, and then, your brain can be made aware of it as well. So all these connections, this wiring is you have. So do you ever think about how you talking to your cell phone and how your buddy is being able to listen to that? I know it's pretty amazing, but you are making sound waves go through the air, and there's inside your cell phone, there's a little membrane that's going to move depending on how loudly and how you talk. And that back and forth of the speaker is going to be transduced or changed into an electrical signal. So you're going to change a physical moving of the air into an electrical signal. And transducing is when you change from one form to another. So we got air wave, pressure waves into electrical signal. And then it turns into a radio signal. It could go to a satellite. It could, if you're talking to someone in England, that it could be transduced from electricity to light waves in a fiber optic cable. So you got laser, it turns into light waves. And on the other end, the light waves are turned back into electricity, which may go to radio waves to go to your friend's cell phone over in England. And then that radio waves turn into electricity, which will move the speaker on the cell phone to recreate that energy that was made here in Maine. And so at each one of those steps, you've transduced or changed the energy from one form to another. That's an amazing example. And let me tell you this, what you're listening to now and what you're seeing, and even a taste of chocolate cake, oh, where's he going now? A smell, anything like that. If you're cut, if you step on some glass, all of that is going to reach your brain. It's going to look like this. That is that chocolate cake. That is being poked in the side. That is being lightly touched. Oh my God, it's the same freaking signal. How do I know the difference between chocolate cake and being stabbed? It all has to do with what part of the brain has been stimulated. And then since I've made this brain, evolution and then my experience has shaped my brain so that I can recognize what part of my brain is stimulated, but it's the same freaking signal. It's just action potential. And there's not even big and little ones. There's one size, it's a blip. And that, depending on if it hits a certain part of my brain, I'm like, oh, that's the chocolate receptor that I obviously bit into some chocolate. And over here is going to be the pain receptor on my left index finger. And I know I'm able to localize where it came from and know that it was in fact pain. I don't mean to be blowing your mind, lecture one, but that is so cool, is that all of our life experiences, the pleasure and the pain, all transduce into a freaking, called an action potential, a blip of electricity. And it's just the building of our brains that are going to translate that single blip into what it is in the world. All right, so let me just tell you. So, the heat, cold, roughness, smoothness, different colors, different smells, different tastes, different consonants and vowels. All of these things are transduced into this action potential, which is going to be a blip. And it's all about our brain, what part of our brain is stimulated, that our brain translates that into what it is. And so something so different is light, photons of light, and a smell, ammonia that reaches a receptor. Those things are so different, but they're transduced into the same electrical signal that's being carried to my brain. Yeah. And these may seem similar, these terms, but sensations are going to be when these action potentials, signals reach our brain. But perception is the way that our mind is going to interpret this. So there's some sensations that reach our brain that we don't, we're not conscious of, things like our blood pressure, things like that. And our perception of things that we are conscious of is completely made up by our brain. It's what value we give to that particular sensation. The sensation is simply a stimulation or part of your brain. Perception is what your brain makes of that, what it translates it into, and what importance it holds. What am I doing here? As the old, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Well, depends how you define the sound. If the sound, if you're going to define it as pressure waves reaching your eardrum, then in fact, it doesn't make a sound if you're not there. If it's just going to be pressure waves in the air, then it makes a sound. I just wanted to clear that up. All right, so we, of course, perceive and have sensations from the outside world, right? I feel the temperature, I smell, I have vision, the reflection of the light is hitting my retina. All these things are exteroreceptors, receptors of the outside world. Interoreceptors, of course, are detecting if you just had a big buffet meal, your stomach is distended, or your uterus hurts, or you have a heartburn, things like that. And a lot of interoceptors we don't have conscious perception of. These are things that your body is looking at your glucose level in your blood, and it's looking at your blood pressure, and you have no idea. But those receptors are sending signals to your brain constantly, and it has the ability to adjust. So let's show you a little bit how this works. You can look here. Here's a neuron, and you can see it's going to look at the stretchiness of this muscle, or you have these in all of your joints too. And what this does, remember, the action potential is going to always be the same. It's always the same height. That's all it can do. Action potentials are all or none, same height. There's not a big one and a little one if it's warm and hot. No, it's just one. The way that we can meter that, way that we can send our brain a signal of intensity is how rapidly the signal is sent. So you can see here, you have action potentials that happen very regularly. With stretching, it can happen more often. And so that tells a part of my brain that this particular joint is my elbow is more and more extended because stretch receptors that can rapidly send the signal or less rapidly. You got it? I'm already telling you early on, action potentials are the same heights. You don't have big ones and little ones, but you can have lots of them set if it's the pan's really hot, or fewer if it's just warm. So that's one way we can do that. Yes, and you talk about transduction of energy. I mean, that comes with the rods in our retina can just get a single photon of light that comes in from space. I mean, and that's enough to change the chemistry and alert my vision in the back of my head that the photon of light hit that retina. And of course, after these signals are if I'm touching braille, I'm touching a velvet versus a hard table, those signals from those touch receptors in my skin go through nerves. They'll go from my hands, up my arm, to my neck region, into the spinal cord, and I'll reach my brain, and then I will perceive what that means, that I'm in fact touching a hard table. All right, so we'll talk about the basic anatomy of neurons. I'll do this quickly because you've all had this in high school biology and such, but a neuron is going to be, of course, going to have a cell body. Here's a nucleus, and it has dendrites. Dendrites means trees. Dendrology is the study of trees. And those are areas where increasing surface area so other neurons can talk to it. And then leaving it will always be just one axon. It's the axon. And at the end will be this would be a synapse, synaptic knob at the end. And axons can branch. They can branch. As you know, in a motor unit in a muscle, one motor neuron can go to thousands of muscle fibers, right? So they can branch. That's called collateral branches that come off, but only one leaves it, and there can be many dendrites. Indeed. Look at that, beautiful. So you see all the dendrites? It looks like a tree with all the branches. It's all for surface area. All for surface area, and you'll have other neurons that come in that are touching it, like, oh, look at that. You can have tens of thousands of other neurons touching this neuron. And then this neuron in question will sum up all these signals and decide whether to fire or not. That's where you have this amazing decision ability. You can see the axon. This area is called the axon hillock, where the axon leaves. We'll see it's kind of an important region. And the axon will be what leaves and sends the signal to wherever it's going, another neuron or a muscle. So neurons are big. And if you look at it, if you remember what the nucleolus does, nucleolus is making ribosomes. And so neurons are very active. They're making neurotransmitter. You guys remember the neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction? Acetylcholine. Yeah. And so they're making that. The ribosomes in the neuron cell body are making these neurotransmitters, for instance, and enzymes, things like that. And it turns out there's no ribosomes in the axon or the end. So the cell body has to make all this stuff, and it's got to send it down the axon, which can be really long. And so there's this transport system up and down the axon where the stuff to be recycled at the end has to go back up to the cell body, and the proteins made in the cell body go down to the end of the axon. Yeah. And the cell body has a grayish color to it. That's what the gray matter in your brain is gray, because there's these Nissl bodies, or Nissl substance is kind of darkish grayish. And so we'll see the gray matter of our brain has a lot of cell bodies in it. And the white matter is going to be the wiring. You can see the wiring is insulated, and that fatty insulation is kind of whitish, yellowish in color. But gray matter means there's lots of these cell bodies because it has all this gray substance within them. Beautiful. And then looking at this, you can see the neurons, and then the neuroglial cells will outnumber them 10 to 1. So it's all around it. Now, you all have heard this, that when you drink or when you lose a bunch of brain cells, they don't come back. And it's kind of true. You do have stem cells that can be turned on to make new neurons, but generally neurons don't divide. You actually grow them early on, and then you kind of shave them down to your adult number. And then it was thought they don't divide at all. And then there's a kind of serendipitous experiment where they found out, oh, there are some stem cells. And so you can regrow neurons, but it just happens very rarely. And a lot of research is into waking them up. So you have Parkinson's disease, and these neurons are not working right. If we could somehow get the stem cells to make some more of the cells that can make the dopamine and things that you need. So a lot of research into getting those stem cells to get them to work, right? All right. So dendrites means trees. And like I say, you look at this one illustration here, huge amount of surface area for communicating with other neurons. You'll see neurofibrils, or these little threads, little tubules that run in the axons, help with that transportation and support. And axons can be, oh my God, you have some nerves that go from your spinal cord in your lumbar region all the way down to your foot. And so some of these are quite long. Now, if you think about moving like a neurotransmitter, how long that is in like microscopic terms, it's just, it's only a meter. Well, we can do that in one step, but imagine how long it would take to move substances that far. Beautiful. We're looking at especially a stained slice through the brain. You can see all these dendrites, the big tree trunks of the axons. All right, so we're wrapping up here, and then I'll do the second half of this particular lecture. But when you look at all the neurons in the world, you have sensory, bring things in, motor, bring things out. But with our huge brains, you can see almost 99% of our neurons are integrative. So they're making decisions, they're making circuits in our brain. But the other 1%, very important, it's going to cause, so I can feel things in my hand, and so that I can tell my hand to move. I have sensory and motor going on there. And neurons, they look quite different. It's almost a continuum what they look like. But we can really, and I'll ask you on the test, 3 main types: bipolar, unipolar, and multipolar. So I'll show you a picture here. So a lot of them are multipolar, and they look like this first one. It has to be a typical motor neuron. So you can see, just like I drew up earlier when we did the anatomy, it's got a cell body, it's got some dendrites, and then it has one axon leaving it. So lots of dendrites means, if you look at the cell body, there's many poles or regions, right? Bipolar has 2 poles, like a north and south pole, right? We see this in sensory, we'll see that in the nose, and the ear, and the eyes too, the vision, yeah. And then sensory neurons are going to be unipolar, meaning they just have one pole. Honestly, there was 2, but then they kind of come together, but it looks like there's one leaving it. So when we look at it, this first one is going to be motor. This one's going to be sensory. And the bipolar is a special case with these special senses, like I mentioned, smell and vision. But normally motor neuron is multipolar, and this unipolar is going to be for sensory neurons. Indeed, and we can just take a look at it if you like. If we start here with some kind of input, I just pricked my finger with a pin. Well, that's going to cause the sensory neuron to send a signal up my arm. And then you can see the cell bodies are going to be in a ganglia right next to the spinal cord. So it's here, and this is It's going to be a unipolar neuron. You can see it's going to come and it's going to hit interneurons, which are going to be ones for decisions, like connections. They're often short, and you can see it's happens to be multipolar. And then a motor neuron is always going to be multipolar, like that, like that. That's going to send it out. So sensory in, some integrative stuff going on there, and then motor is going to send a signal out. Got it? When you see effectors, it's making an effect. Usually it's a muscle moving. Yeah, big old motor neuron. You can see this big body. It's multipolar, meaning it has lots of dendrites and an axon leaving it. Yeah. Here's an interneuron, also multipolar, but you can see these are packed in your brain or spinal cord, right? You can see, so they don't need a very long axon because they're just talking to their neighbors, right? Motor neurons may have an axon like a meter long going all the way out your arm or all the way out your leg. And sensory is this unipolar. It's in parentheses because really, I told you already, it's two poles turned into one, but that's what we're going to see here. Do you guys see in this ganglia right there? You see that's where the cell body is. And sensation comes in, the cell body's in the middle, sensation continues in to the central nervous system. And then it can be directly go right to a motor neuron, which is going to leave and cause an effect. Here's a bipolar neuron. You can see it has two poles. And we see this just in a few rare cases. All right, beautiful. So gave you quite a bit. I'm just gonna get a drink of water here. I've been talking quite a bit, but introduced you. I gave you a lot of big picture things. I mean, I'm fascinated by the nervous system. It's the ability to how memory works and the ability to have creativity, all the things that makes us human is happening in this brain. And there's so much that is not known. Like I say, how exactly memory works, we don't know, all the personality disorders and depression in the world, what exactly is going on. We have clues about chemistry and things like that, but there's just so much that is unknown. And so it's, in terms of our systems we're learning in AMP, it is nervous systems can be the most difficult to teach, and this complexity. But we'll learn in lab the major areas of the brain, and we'll get into the functioning of these things. But all right, so here's the end of part one of my first lecture, and I'll finish up right here in a moment for you.